out today. I know it's rainy outside and probably not the easiest thing to do to get here. Can you see us okay? Okay, great. So this is our first Lunch and Learn for the summer, so thank you for being here. We're going to learn some really exciting, interesting things today. And then next Thursday, we're going to be talking about canoes, dugout canoes that have been found in Florida, so that'll be interesting too. You can pick up one of our little Lunch and Learn series flyers up there on your way out or go online. Also, Tondra wanted me to remind everybody that we have our Key West Insiders Tour that's September 27th through the 29th. If you would like to learn more about that, that's online as well. So today, we're going to hear from Amanda Hardeman, who is the state folklorist and the director of the Florida Folklife program at the Florida Department of State. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to try something. I'm going to move this over here. If you all need to get out, let me know. I'll adjust. All right. So I do work. Oh, back up a little bit. Yeah. Okay. So I do work for the Department of State in the Division of Historical Resources. The state's very lucky to have a Florida Folklife program, a state-run program. We have a statute and everything to back us up. And we're going to talk today about how folklife and historic preservation go hand in hand, and then some of the skills that you can use to do your own community documentation projects. So we'll go through a lot of stuff, and I'll talk about all this stuff, and you know, there's a lot. But if you have questions, we can talk about it individually. I can answer your questions, and then we're basically the statewide resource for this stuff. So if you want to take on a project on your own, or you have any ideas, you can always give me a call or an email, and we can talk about those, you know, in more in depth. So we'll breeze through pretty quickly today, but if you have questions, let us know. And I guess, let's see. I was kind of curious as to what brought you all here, like what piqued your interest on this topic. Pepper and Frank, start out.
Just building the oral history of the family and our area of town and all those things.
Yeah. Has anyone else ever done their own documentation projects, oral histories? No? Are you interested to do so? Yes? Okay, good. Well, we'll get to that. We're going to talk about a little context and a little bit about what folklife is, and then we'll get to that towards the end. But what is folklife? So, you know, as a folklorist, I study folklife. And it's a lot of different things, but the key to the definition is that it consists of traditional beliefs, customs, stories, all of this information that's shared informally between people. So key to that is that it's things that are currently practiced. It's living traditions, it's living arts and culture that are shared among groups of people who have something in common. So this can be family groups, it can be occupational groups, co-workers, it can be regional, it could be cities, it could be ethnic communities. But the idea is that they have a common worldview, a common experience, and they're actively sharing and passing on expressive culture or traditional arts. So when we talk about Florida folklife, we could be referring to family folklore, like the dishes that you serve at family gatherings, foodways, that's a big genre of folklore, everybody can get behind that. We could be talking about occupational folklore, so it's traditions that are shared within occupations, like the whips made by cattlemen or nets made by shrimpers or net makers. It could be insider knowledge within those groups. Shrimpers share a lot of insider knowledge about weather patterns, and they even share some superstitions. So it could be traditions that are rooted in a place or a region. A lot of musical traditions will be reflected that way. Fiddle tunes are regional in most cases. And then it could also include the ethnic traditions that are shared among Florida's newer communities. So it is vast. It's a wide variety of different things under that umbrella term of folklife. And it's all based on this word folklore, which literally means knowledge of the people. So if you look that up, the root of those words is the knowledge shared among people. So in a nutshell, folklife is made up of the living traditions that help to define who we are and where you're from, basically. So folklorists, you know, like myself, recognize the value of experience-based knowledge and create programs that showcase community culture and heritage, so that people can engage with their own history and heritage and that of others. So it's a tool that's used for people to learn more about themselves and learn more about other people as well. So I'd like to take a few moments to contextualize the public folklore movement in light of historic preservation. So public folklore basically means anyone who's doing this work in the public sector. You know, I'm based in state government, other folklorists work for the federal government, and we're doing applied practical work in the public sector. So in 1966, the National Historic Preservation Act was signed, which created a national infrastructure for historic preservation. And so our program, the Florida Folklife Program, is the only state program based in a historic preservation office, which gives us this really unique opportunity to tie in living cultural resources or intangible cultural heritage into historic preservation practice. So historic preservation can often be, structures, archaeological sites, and brick and mortar type structures. But folklife can add in that intangible, the cultural heritage element to that. So while many preservation projects are the brick and mortar variety, efforts to preserve and promote traditional arts and narratives of America and its people have long existed and in some cases predate the National Historic Preservation Act. We'll talk about a few of those. So many of you are familiar with Federal Writers Project. Some of the earliest preservation projects were products of the New Deal. So this is where up-and-coming folklorists, writers, and photographers traveled all around the South, and they were trying to identify the American experience. So they were documenting the American way of life. And a lot of that's reflected in the work done by Stetson Kennedy here in Florida. Throwing out some folklorists for you. Stetson Kennedy and Zora Neale Hurston, and I know most of you are familiar with Zora. So their work primarily focused on music and dance traditions and occupational traditions. Zora went to a lot of the work camps for turpentine and timber and interviewed people. So that's the basis of what we now have in the Florida Folklife Collection, housed at the State Archives. Their work is the basis of that. You can find this stuff on Florida Memory, by the way. So in 1976, Congress passed the American Folklife Preservation Act. So this is Folklorist's Act. It was key because it acknowledged that folklife has contributed greatly to the cultural richness of the nation and has fostered a sense of individuality and identity among the American people. So that's a quote. The Act established the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress in D.C., which is dedicated to preserving and presenting American folklife through various research projects and training. Most importantly, the American Folklife Preservation Act defined and legitimized folklife, so it made folklife a valuable part of our cultural heritage by establishing that formal definition behind me. It's rather long and tedious, but it's community culture. That's the easiest way to boil it down. But this look at cultural resources and intangible cultural heritage, so the things that are not necessarily always tangible, led to directives that established state-based folklife programs like the one in Florida. So we were established in 1979, and our mission is to identify, document, preserve, and promote folk and traditional arts in Florida. So Florida's a big state, and it is a big task, but since the beginning, our program has collected thousands of interviews and amassed a wealth of information and documents regarding traditional arts. We have a massive contact list. Every year we do this field work, and the field work is then deposited where it's made accessible to the public in a variety of different ways. We have educational units based on folklife field work. We have publications and collections of music. We have Florida Memory Radio. All of this stuff's available through the State Archive and Florida Memory, so we work pretty closely with those two groups. And the field work that makes up this folklife collection is also the basis of any public programs that we are creating. So that gets us to field work itself. When I say field work, I'm talking about the process of learning by asking questions and observing and documenting what's going on. And that is the root, it's the core of what we do as folklorists. So we've conducted fieldwork surveys in a variety of different communities across the state on a variety of different topics. We've documented traditional music, dance, arts, celebrations, occupations, beliefs, stories, rites of passage, and so much more. And then that information can help us, build a better understanding of what's going on in these communities across the state and how things change over time. So the fieldwork increases our knowledge and understanding of traditional communities in light of Florida's evolving cultural landscape. So this state is particularly known for having a very fast evolving culture. We have people moving in all the time. We have technological advancements. We have tourism industries that are changing things. And folk life acknowledges those changes over time. And that's kind of one of the main differences between folk life and folklore and history. History is looking at the past to glean information. We're looking at what's going on right now and how it's changed and why, what's contributed to those changes. So why does it all matter? So folk traditions are the basis upon which people establish and pass on shared values and specialized knowledge. So through viewing folk life as an important part of our cultural heritage, we're using it as a tool. So a tool that can help us gain a better understanding of where those folks are coming from, their aesthetics, why they do the things they do, and then their overall worldview. So folk life tells us what people value and how they ascribe meaning to their surroundings, their lives, and their spaces. And that's where it ties into historic preservation. As a folklorist, my approach is to always use a holistic approach where I'm incorporating historical, environmental, and cultural resources and influences. That's going to help me build a better understanding of a community that I'm going into to document. So in terms of historic preservation, folk life is the human element, and it's a powerful way to make history come to life. It's a great tool that can be used in a variety of different ways. The same techniques that I use as a folklorist can be used by individuals and community members to document their own family history or to document local community culture. A lot of historical societies, this is a great technique for them to build their own local archive. Preservationists can use this information to better preserve their structures and sites and interpret those areas. And then in cities and small businesses, and this might be the most powerful way that the tool can be used, it can be used by cities and small businesses to promote cultural heritage tourism, which is huge right now. We all hear that buzzword term, but it also helps to basically put a seat at the table for the community. So if you're doing a development project, or you're doing city planning, or you're updating your historic structures, give the community a seat at the table and work with them instead of against them. Folk life and oral history can help you do that. So it's basically a way of giving the community a seat at that table and giving them a voice. So how are we putting folklore to work? So with the state program, with the Florida Folk Life program, we primarily do public programming and all of that based on fieldwork that we've conducted every year. So that we're going in, doing the ethnographic interviews and photos, and then that in turn feeds into our programming. With the Folk Festival, we have some photos here from the Folk Festival. That's a great opportunity to allow the public to interact with and learn from traditional arts and culture. We often stage, musicians, or we'll have, when we focused on Miami, we had domino gameplay stations. So people can learn about it, see why it's important, and then actually engage with it. So it's like a more holistic approach to learning. We all know that. We also do educational programs in the schools where we bring traditional artists up to do programming with children, so K-12 schools and master classes at FSU. Another great way to reach people. Through all of these experiences, they're learning more about Florida's heritage and history, but also learning about that of other people. So it's building this greater level of understanding. We've created books, CD compilations, educational lesson plans and units that go out to schools. So lots of different public program resources coming out of the Florida Folk Life program. So I'm pandering to the audience a little bit here, so forgive me for that, but here are some examples of how other people are using this stuff in their work. So a lot of people are using the same techniques that folklorists use, and they don't know it. They don't know that folklore exists. They don't know that to be a folklorist is a thing. But you can use these techniques a variety of different ways. So I love this local example with the Old Lewis Dairy. So it's a historic events venue, beautifully restored by Frank Pepper, and they're really embracing the history of that place, the family history there, and the occupational history of this area of Tallahassee. So don't work against that. Embrace it and use it to your advantage. And that's one example of how that's being done locally. Let's see. So another group that's embracing community stories, the Florida Scenic Highways program, an awesome program out of FDOT. You can see their tagline, real people, real stories. This stuff works. People want to connect when they're traveling, when they're on vacation. They want to connect with something. And folk life, community heritage, and history. This is one way that they can do that. So here's an example from Kentucky. I'm from Kentucky, and we have this great program that the Kentucky Arts Council just did called Homemade Homegrown. And they actually received a USDA Rural Development Grant. So the Arts Council was branching out from the National Endowment for the Arts to get funding from the USDA, and they got this grant, and it was a huge grant, very successful. And the idea that they pitched was to go into communities, rural communities that had fledgling farmers markets, and create these committees, these multi-ethnic, multi-generational groups of community members who could help identify local traditional arts and culture, and then turn that into exhibits, like pop-up exhibits, real easily done, pop-up banners, that can go to these farmers markets. So this is one way that you can add a little community identity to your farmers markets. So rather than just going and seeing your table and your tomatoes, they get the context of that area. These exhibits focus on local foodways and traditional arts. So that's a really cool success story and something that anybody can do. It's a great way to showcase rural heritage. Another example is the Humanities Council does the great Florida Stories walking tours. It's like an app that you can do, a great tourism example. Tallahassee has one, and Tarpon Springs has one. Several other communities have them. Has anybody ever used those?
I took a picture for them.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. But for the Tarpon Springs example, I know that there's a folklore space there, and working with the community is the way that she made that happen. So working with folk life, highlighting that community identity, what makes that place special, and it's the stories that people tell and the meaning that they give those places. So,
Amanda,
yeah.
can you go back to the slides and let us get a picture of our faces up there with you?
Yes, ma'am.
I have my website. You got one? Oh, she's got it. Well, thank you. Oh no, but she had to go way back.
So let's see. So Tarpon Springs is a really cool example of a place whose meaning, has changed over time due to the history and immigration and industry, right? So the turn of the last century, a lot of Greeks settled in Tarpon Springs because of the sponging industry there. Over time, that industry, went down a little bit, but they continue to experience immigration patterns where the Greeks are coming there because you want to be where your people are, right? That's normal. That makes sense. And now when you walk downtown, you hear Greek being spoken, you smell Greek food being cooked, there's a Greek coffee house. They have Night in the Islands, which is, it mimics the panegyrias or outdoor festivals that they had in Greece. Music, dance, food, drinking, it is like you are in Greece. And so let's see, I think I've got a couple more examples there. So before I get to my next thing, TCPs, we'll show you a video. So the Folk Life program just did this video. We have an apprenticeship program where a master artist takes on an apprentice, and the idea is it's fostering the passing on of those traditions. And so this gentleman, Leo Zafiris, teaches Greek bouzouki and other types of Greek instruments to the youth in Tarpon Springs. So a lot of these folks are second generation. So this is a great way for them to kind of, pick up on traditions that they might not normally have. So I will let that play through. And it also characterizes, the importance of traditional culture to the people. And coincidentally, the video was shot on the porch of the historic Sacker House. Oh. You can adjust the
I was
volume.
born in a small village in a city that's called Trikala. I was going to, we call it Panegyria there. It's kind of festival, small festivals that every single community organizes. So that's how I fell in love. I see the people playing the instruments.
Is just, I think, an integral part of Greek culture, and something that if you're Greek, you can't grow up without noticing. And especially here in Tarpon Springs, which is where I lived most of my life, we maintained a lot of the traditions. As you're saying, the Panegyria, the festivals, and I've been dancing since I was 4 years old. I thought to myself as a little kid, how amazing would it be for me to be up there playing some of the music? And it was a couple years ago that I found the uti, and I fell in love with it because of how it was fretless.
So it's very difficult to practice, to be on tune. In the Western music, the classical music, they hit the notes always like they're on the note. This one, you have to hit quarter tones, sixth of a tone, an eighth of a tone, all the different microtones that they make the scale sound different. This instrument came to Greece in about 1922. It became famous because it was the exchange of population, like with Turkey. The two governments came like in an agreement. The Christians came back to Greece and the Muslims, they went back to Turkey. The people that they came from Minor Asia to Greece, they brought all these instruments, uti, kanonaki, so many different, ney, kaval, the instruments that they used there. After 1922, it became part of the traditional Greek music. But they use different microtones. So from each region, you have to have a good ear to hear the microtones to play. It's a very, very big challenge. But he does it so well, like for the time we are together. Pergamos is a place in Minor Asia. So the Greeks that they left Minor Asia with the exchange of population, they're talking about their place. They're missing their place. That's where you do the sliding.
I was actually really excited when I heard about the program because I just love the culture and tradition so much. It's an opportunity to carry on a tradition that may otherwise be lost.
Yes, it's about carrying the tradition and pass it to the next generation. And Nick is the next generation right now.
So you can hear in their narrative, the importance of place. And so carrying these traditions forward is one way that they can connect with that heritage, that history. And what I think is interesting is that they're using that space. So the history of the Savard House has nothing to do with Greek culture, but they are now using that space to do these Greek music lessons. So how do we incorporate that story and the history of that house? And that's kind of what folklorists are interested in. That's what gets us going, is how do we, incorporate new and interesting ways of using these historic spaces. So, and that also brings me to traditional cultural properties. Are you all familiar with those, TCPs? Okay, so this is a National Register designation that is specifically designed for things that might fall outside of the more typical National Register criteria. So traditional cultural properties. So a lot of times these could be sacred spaces or spaces that have meaning because of the culture. So cultural meaning, cultural significance. And Tarpon Springs, Greektown Historic District is a TCP. So a couple of years ago, a folklorist got that project pulled together, used a lot of community input and folk life research and oral history in order to get that listed as a traditional cultural property. So that's one example of a way to acknowledge, culture and how it changes. TCPs are really good at that. This is just another example elsewhere. So the Center for Louisiana Studies did this great online exhibit about Louisiana dance halls. And one of my favorite examples, this is a product of a partnership between Alabama Arts Council and the Alabama Public Television. They do a TV show hosted by a folklorist, which would be so cool if we could get that going in Florida. And he just travels around and explores community culture and folk life. So it's a great way to bring that to the masses, to the public.
And you should meet Kim County at WFSU.
Yeah, I know some people up there. They've shown interest in our events and done stuff with us. It's great. We have a couple of things that went out on the Florida Channel. Okay. So another example, a little maritime history heritage. At the Florida Maritime Museum in Cortez, they recently launched, well, it's been a little bit, maybe a year ago, they launched a folk school. So it's a way for them to highlight and preserve heritage crafts that would have been practiced in this fishing village. They do workshops on everything from fish painting to net making, knot tying, quilting, and it's been massively successful. It's actually a revenue generator for the museum. So that's another way to do this, is to think about workshops. And History Miami, in Miami, they have an exhibit up right now called Avenues of Expression about street traditions. And the entire exhibit is based off folk life field work that they've conducted about street culture and street arts. And here's a little, let's see if I can get this to play. This one's tricky.
I'm Serge Toussaint. I'm a street artist from Little Haiti, and this is my street tradition.
That's just a little promo video they did for the exhibit, but it shows, you know, and they have a variety of these about different things that are going on in these urban areas. But that shows you, like, you know, how people are using space in a contemporary way in an urban area. Okay. Let's skip something. So here's another example of, and it's a more intangible example. So how are people, you know, promoting oral traditions, and how can we look at that in terms of places and spaces and buildings and structures? So there's a hip-hop artist in Jacksonville who hosts a freestyle open mic cipher. So a cipher is like an open mic event. Anybody can come up, he sets up on the street, anybody can come up and take the mic and do a freestyle run, but they have to follow the rules. And so you can kind of see how he's created this interesting little community in downtown Jacksonville.
I started doing hip hop in Jacksonville. There really was no hip hop community. There was just a few people that rhymed in the city, and we would get up together and meet up at these certain events, and they would end up growing and growing, and we got what we have today. I started the Lyricist Live as a way to kind of bring exposure to my city as far as with hip hop, as far as the artistry of it.
On the mic, it's just opposite of summer. I'm going harder till I thought it was bottom. Steady guessing in this section, all bottom. Guarantee they giving you reason why I'm trying to turn my life into a future. I'll leave for the better of a preacher. It's like grandma going, boy, let the voice hold the line. I'm trying in the streets, just trying to preach, just getting complicated.
When Cool Herc started the party jams, he would just play different types of music, and that would bring the people out. Well, I kind of blended the formula for the birthplace of hip hop and the art of freestyle rhyme, where I'm making up the music as I go along, and I'm kind of creating the environment to where other MCs can join in and do the same thing, so it becomes this like tribal community cipher that goes on, where we feed off of each other. That's what I wanted to do with the Lyricist Live, is just make it something that everybody can participate in and show that hip hop can actually like solve a lot of problems that we're having in our community.
So I would tell some other people to support the apprenticeship program or try to join it because it's an avenue for knowledge that is obviously worth preserving and passing forward.
I just appreciate the opportunity to have a program like this because, like I was saying before, it allows me to be able to put into context what it is I actually do every day, you know, and it's teaching lots of people, you know, how to do this. And a lot of kids are interested in it. They don't know how to go about doing it, so a lot of them end up going down a path they might not necessarily took. And this gives me, you know, the opportunity just with the funding and stuff to reach more of those kids, you know, to reach more people, and show them the positive side of doing this.
All right. So that's really just a really cool example of how people are using public spaces in traditional ways, and how, you know, through looking at things from a folklorist lens, you can acknowledge the value of that. And just how fresh and contemporary, you know, culture is. These just pop up once a month, and there's like 100 people around them, and they have a great time, and then they're gone. But so now we'll bring you to the fieldwork process. So this is some of the ways that we as folklorists look at the work that we do, you know, how we approach it, and hopefully, you know, can kind of inspire you all to do your own projects, because that's the point of all of this. Is we need help. we need community members out there collecting oral histories with families, with their communities, and documenting it. Because what better way to do that than from the inside? You don't need an outsider coming in and doing that for you. So in any project, you've got planning, interview, presentation, and preservation phases. So this is how we look at it. And planning is important because you always want to have a clear set of goals and a clear scope. So you wouldn't want to embark on an oral history project that was too broad or broader than the resources that you have at hand. I have budget listed on there. If you have a budget, that's great. If you can get a grant to do this, that's awesome. But you can do this on almost nothing. I say that from experience. You don't have to have a big budget to do an oral history project. Technology is extremely accessible now. I have heard of people doing this on their iPhones. So you can do this. Everybody's got cameras and some sort of recording device nowadays. So if you just wanted to go out and conduct some oral history interviews with your family members, it's definitely doable. If you've got a budget, that's cool too. And we can point you into the right direction for resources for grants and such if you're interested in doing something like that. And then the last thing I want to point out is ethics. Whenever you're doing this work, you should always keep in mind your responsibility as the field worker or interviewer. Your responsibility is to the folks that you work with and folks that you represent. So it can be very powerful, and you want to be aware of representation at all times. For the interview process, this is the core of everything, these face-to-face interviews with individuals, giving them the opportunity to tell their story, giving them a platform and a voice. And anytime you do this, you start your interview by making sure that these folks know exactly what you're going to do with that interview, exactly how it will be used, explain the project in great detail, make sure you have consent to conduct that interview and to use it in that manner. When you're actually in the midst of the interview, it's more about practicing listening, really good listening skills. Your questions shouldn't be leading, and you should avoid yes or no questions. But it's about focusing on what the interviewee wants to tell you and share. So you should have pretty good verbal and nonverbal communication skills. Practice careful listening is what we call it in the biz. Post-interview, so that's where you're getting that consent form signed. We always do consent forms, especially if you're going to do some sort of exhibit or something open to the public. You want to have consent. And you can also do any kind of contextual data information. We always get folks their email address and all of that. And if there's any notes that you should make or points that you want to follow up on, you would take those. Field notes, some folks do that. We always do photographic documentation. It adds an extra layer of context to this work. I think that it's always a good idea, especially now in the visual age. You have to have photos or videos or something to go along with it. In the old days, we could just get by with an audio interview, but people expect a little more. You can see how powerful and compelling those little 3-minute YouTube videos are. You could do like 25, the History of Miami videos are 25 seconds. And you learned all about Serge Toussaint, being a street artist in 25 seconds. So visuals are really important. Just some things we point out is we always get a variety of shots, a portrait shot of the subject, the interviewee, environmental shots. It gives you a lot of context about where they're working, what they're doing, whether they're in a workshop. That's Tom Granato in bottom center. He's a Norteño accordion player in Webster. So this awesome workshop. Or detail shots, so it kind of shows the tools of the trade. So what are the folks working with? Variety of angles, variety of shots. Composition, rule of thirds. When you use the rule of thirds, you divide the frame into thirds, and then that, put your subject in one of those quadrants, the third quadrant, and that really brings your photos up a notch. And always leave headroom. Don't chop people off at the head. So lots of headroom. Just little techniques that bring your photography up. After we do our photos, we always do a photo log that adds, all that information you can't get from the image itself. This is all relevant if you're going to archive things, because 100 years from now, we're not going to know who these people are. So you need to have some sort of documentation. You say who it is, where it was photographed, what they're doing, and any other kind of info you might have. So that's like a barber shop in the potato capital of Florida, Hastings. A barber shop in Hastings, Florida cattlemen, and then Greek Epiphany at the bottom. Video documentation, same techniques as photo in terms of leaving headroom and rule of thirds. When I'm doing this field work, a lot of times I'm by myself, so I'll have a camera set up to my right. Again, these cameras are not, it doesn't have to be a $3,000 purchase. You can get a little video camera now that's very affordable and get this great stuff that you can put up on YouTube, share on Facebook. But yeah, sit your little camera next to you. You're on this side. You instruct your interviewee to look at you, not the camera, and then have a conversation. Go from there. One of the things that we find out pretty quickly with video is that poor image quality is forgivable, poor audio is not. If you have really good audio, people, they don't really care what they're looking at. So that's key. So the final part of all this is, what are we going to do with it? And folklorists always advocate for using these projects in some way. It's great to preserve it in the archive and make it accessible to the public through those research avenues. But we try to find another way for people to interact with it. Not everybody's going to go to the library, the archive, and do research in that way. So that's where we come in with YouTube videos. We do these little video highlights on traditions and artists. The publications we've released and public programs, exhibits. There's a variety of different examples of how you can create programming based on oral history interviews and use them in many different ways. So that brings me to the end. And one thing that I wanted to bring your attention to is, so say you want to do this stuff and you're like, I don't remember anything that happened today. Like, that was too much information overload on this rainy Thursday. There are tons of resources online. The Folklife and Fieldwork publication is a PDF. I don't know if it'll let me go to it. It's available through the Library of Congress's American Folklife Center. Yay, we love the AOC. And so this is a publication that'll tell you exactly how to do this. You can get a hard copy of it. You can get a box of them if you want to do it, share it with a whole group of people, or you can find it right here. So it has all of the same techniques that folklorists use, and it's relevant for anybody. So that's a great resource. And you can also always call a folklife program. Like I said, we're the statewide resource for all things folklife and traditional arts. That includes, oral history. So if you want to talk about a project idea, you need some tips or advice, or have some materials you want to donate to our archive and need be pointed in the right direction, just give us a call. But do you all have any questions right now?
I do.
Yes.
So you're encouraging people to document and collect their stories and post on YouTube. How do you coordinate the efforts with the program?
At times we've come in.
Repeat the question too, so they can hear.
Okay. So the question was, how do we incorporate, community oral history projects in the Folk Life program. A lot of times we'll come in an advisory capacity, and we can help in that way. Or if it fits into our scope or our plan for our long-range plan, then we may even take projects on ourselves. A lot of times it's a one-off thing. Someone will call us and say, oh, well, there's this, fascinating community member that we want documented, and if I can make it work, I can come out and do it myself. But if it's a whole project, we would serve in an advisory capacity. And sometimes we can take that material on, especially if we're participating in it, we can take it on at the state archives, deposit it there. Does that answer your question? Like, how do we work with them? Yeah, so we can take their project if we're working with them. But we don't usually ask for everyone to send in their projects. The first line of communication I'd point you to is if you wanted to do something local, super community-based, talk to your local museums and historical societies, because that material is going to be more relevant in your community.
I have a part 2.
Sure.
You mentioned TCPs. How many would you say are in Florida?
Oh, okay, so she's asking about TCPs. I am not the TCP expert, but I'm told we have 2. Yeah.
The Seminole tribe has a tree. They were the first. The tribal historic preservation office got the first listing, and I believe that Greektown is the only.
So the Seminole tribe has the first designation, and then the second is the Greektown Historic District. And just to give you a little context, there are not that many even in the nation. So it's still something that's underutilized, in my opinion. I think that there should be more TCPs coming in. We want those coming in.
Does that gain you any other tax advantages or anything if you have that certification?
I don't think it, again, I'm not the TCP expert. All this stuff's online. I would refer you to that, but I don't think it gets you any tax incentives. And it's, TCPs are often for locations that don't have the kind of structural integrity that that a normal National Register designation would get you. So, it is a lot of sacred sites where there's not a structure, or in the case of Greektown, it's the Greektown TCP is a lot of those structures had been modified, so they would not necessarily qualify under the NR criteria, but the TCP was acknowledging why they'd been modified, and they'd been modified because Greek residents were putting columns on their houses, and they had courtyards where they kept goats during Epiphany, and all these culturally imbued places of meaning for those people.
I have a quick question, but I don't want to jump in front of anybody else's question if there's anybody else. So you mentioned a little bit how folk life can be a component of historic preservation. And every year the Florida Trust does their 11 to Save, the 11 most at-risk historic places in the state. And as you were kind of talking through the program, the presentation today, I was thinking of that 11 to Save list. And do you have any thoughts on how we could guide people in those local communities to incorporate folk, for example, last year we had a property called The Nest, and it was a pioneer settlement in Brandon in Florida, and it was the last of its kind. It's off of a highway now where it's all gas stations and KFC and Taco Bell, and then there's this one place where settlers came, and it's amazing. And the woman whose grandfather built it is still alive. She's like 95. But is this maybe a program that could help to capture that story and tell the story of the place? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's all we're talking about is capturing that story. And it's like what you do with that is up to you. It can be used in so many different ways. And that's sometimes the hard thing about talking about this is that basically what I'm telling you all to do is to look at the world from a folkloristic lens, from that perspective. So, in doing your work, the way you would do it as a historic preservationist or historic venue, coordinator, whatever, in doing your work, how can you incorporate those community stories? Ask yourself that question. And it can be in very simple ways. It doesn't have to be a whole museum exhibit or a pop-up exhibit that you do at your event. But how do you incorporate those stories in the interpretation of that place's significance and history? So yeah, it's limitless, basically. I think there's so many different ways. So just keeping it in mind, in the back of your mind. I don't expect everybody to go out and start, you know, I'm a folklorist now. But you don't have to go get the degree. It's too expensive. Don't worry about that. But just, you know, look at the world in that same way. Like, what makes this space significant beyond, you know, four walls or even basic history? You know, how's it being used now? Ask yourself that question. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. I think that we can get someone to, like you're saying, the technology.
And like, we can brainstorm. I'd love to talk to you.
Because there probably is opportunities. Because the way that it, to me, is like historic preservation a little bit is that there's also a timeliness, you know.
Yeah.
She's going to pass soon. And so we have a limited amount of time to collect that story, and then it's lost. So there are some similarities there, too.
And see, the trouble comes in, so there's tons of that in
I know,
the
right?
state.
It's overwhelming.
And we have one folklife program for the whole state. It's based in Tallahassee, like 8 hours from Miami. You know, it's a big state. There's tons of stuff. The timeliness issue, yeah, I can't do it all. I wouldn't expect any, you know, program to try to take it on either. I think that doing it within your communities, if you know about a place, see if someone locally can take this on, or work with us, you know, in advisory capacity from up here to get that oral history documented. Because it's better to have it than to not have it. I mean, you don't worry about how you're going to use it, just get it.
Yeah.
And then see how you're going to use it later.
Yeah.
In those cases.
Right. Do we have any other questions before we let Amanda flee? No? Thank you.
Thank you all for coming today. It's good to see familiar faces.